Atlanta was the heartbeat to it. Everything that was happening with the civil rights era.
The civil rights movement is not just a period of activism between the 1940s and the 1960s.
You know, anytime something goes on in the area, anything pertaining with Martin Luther King, it all starts right here.
Everything about this community was meant for African Americans to feel empowered.
It's an ongoing struggle. Atlanta has a long history of civil rights activism dating back to the Reconstruction era. Their actions challenge and redefine the meaning of freedom as a social contract in America. Immediately after the Civil War, newly freed blacks abandoned the cotton and rice plantations throughout Georgia to try their fortune in Atlanta, a city destroyed by fire, but on the verge of resurrecting from the ashes.
Atlanta had its period of that southern royalty city. We had the Civil War, the burning of Atlanta, and then we rose like a phoenix. So we adjust to whatever's happening.
You know, it is the heartbeat of the South here, but it's got this progressive thinking that, you know, people underestimate it and undervalue it.
So early on in the beginning, there were a certain demographic of individuals within the city that wanted to push towards progressive change, to get things right between blacks and whites. And so Reconstruction was such a wonderful, but yet troublesome period in the United States, because there was this tug of war between those who had power, who wanted to retain that power, wanted to hold on to it, and then those who were coming into power as well too, such as African Americans.
The significant thing about this neighborhood, period, is Atlanta is a very empowered city in theory and in actual. So since 1972, 73, we've had black mayors. So all these schools, everything about this neighborhood, everything about this community was meant for African Americans to feel empowered. From Joseph B. Boone to Tiger Flowers, who was a famous boxer, streets named for him. Everything about this is, I didn't have to go anywhere looking for black power. I was living it, you know? So Atlanta's a great city like that.
So you have all these exciting things that were going on 20 years prior to the passing of the Civil Rights Act. But I wanted to ask myself, how did this occur? It didn't happen with just the efforts of one dynamic leader or two national civil rights organizations, but it required the efforts of so many different people, faces of people, names of people who had become unrecognizable or had just been forgotten. So I wanted to challenge myself in that way, to make the unfamiliar familiar. In my book, Atlanta and the Civil Rights Movement, 1944 to 1968, I decided to challenge myself as a historian to tell a much more expansive history about the modern civil rights movement. And in my approach, I began to look at photographs. I began to see that the movement consisted of both young and old, an old guard and a new guard, the activism of both students as well as professors, professionals and grassroots activists is where the secular and the sacred world actually came together, the business community and the religious leaders.
There is opportunity for change and growth to define your own future for yourself, I think is what makes Atlanta special.
And if you think about the Baptist preacher who's born in a house 3 doors down from where his daddy was preaching, goes on to lead that church and lead a movement to change the country and get us that much closer to the American dream, none of that should have worked. And it all does and all has because of Atlanta.
This is called the downtown Atlanta, Auburn Avenue Northeast, better known as the 4th Ward. And this is the birth home of Martin Luther King Jr.
There's just this wonderful thing of Martin Luther King Jr. His entire legacy and that whole family have really innovated the emotional structure of this town. And it's just been a part of it. It's like the concrete. It's what you build on. And it's built an amazing environment.
In knowing the history and what has transpired in this church, it's just so awesome to walk through and to look and see the photos and the various things that has taken place in this church that you can read about, to know that it's happened here. And it's a warm feeling to know that you're on this type of sacred ground. Okay? I'm gonna end it there.
All right.
Yeah.
Atlanta has a history of whites and blacks working collectively for racial equality. We truly see this with the Southern Regional Council, which was founded in Atlanta, the NAACP, the Urban League, and even earlier with the emergence of historically black colleges in the city, founded by Northern whites who believed that education was a civil right. Although a progressive city, Atlanta was not a racial utopia. As African Americans and members of the Jewish faith gained economic power, they were met with fierce opposition by supporters of the status quo, namely white supremacy. But what happened here in Atlanta that's really remarkable was that these individuals, members of the white community, the white teachers, the white professors, the white board members, the white philanthropists, they were risking their lives to actually educate African Americans.
I feel it's my ancestral duty to vote because of the blood that was shed in order for it to happen.
But what makes Atlanta so unique, and I think this is why Atlanta is considered to be the epicenter of the civil rights movement, is because it had the largest consortium of black colleges and universities.
You have a responsibility to the people that were in this restaurant in 1947 and 57 and 67, to the people that, you know, marched and that lost life, for the people that lost job and a way to afford to take care of their family, for the men that met right next door at the old Pascal's restaurant, for the students that went to the AUC. You're supposed to. It's for me as an African American, it's a way of paying my ancestral ties.
When we look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it wasn't intended for it to apply only to African Americans, but to include other members of marginalized communities as well too. Those who are female, those who live in rural communities, those who belong to the LGBT community as well. So its intention was to protect the rights of laborers. It was to protect us within the public sphere as well too. So that's the thing that I want people to walk away when we think about the Civil Rights Act. I want them to see themselves in it as well too.
My kids, they have no idea that there was a struggle. Like, you have to teach them because they don't see it around themselves. And that's an accomplishment.
You know, wherever you might be coming from, there's opportunity here, that gate is not closed, right? That this is a terminal where anyone can make a stop and move up in their lives, right?
There is opportunity for change and growth to define your own future for yourself, I think is what makes Atlanta special.
And while we've made great progress, we still have a long way to go. So when we talk about the civil rights movement, it really is an ongoing movement. We have to continue to fight for people who are marginalized and who are underrepresented. And it's still needed today. 50 years later, we still have to talk about all the things that was articulated in the Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the Appeal for Human Rights that was actually authored by Rosalind Pope, who was a student at Spelman and was an activist in 1960. All the things such as health care, equal education, voting protection, housing, all of these things that were articulated in the civil rights movement still apply to us today.
I just want to encourage that person who doesn't know if people will accept them for who they are. But regardless, embrace the things that make you unique, even if it makes others uncomfortable, including yourself.
Atlanta is an amazing place. I feel like it's an embodiment of America.
Atlanta is global. Atlanta is cultural.
And the idea that anyone can come here. And that's why I love living here.
Atlanta is educated. Atlanta is progressive.
And Atlanta already is something, the rest of the world just doesn't know it yet. And once they find that out, it's gonna be game on.